Okay, so we're going to work on page 24. And number 1 says find the sum. So now, whenever you're dealing with decimals and fractions, I find a lot of students get confused. So what I want you to always do is estimate these as integers. So negative 12.5 is very close to negative 12. 3.2, very close to 3. Now, I can do negative 12 plus 3 in my head. Okay, so this estimate would be negative 9. One thing I'm sure of, my answer is negative. So, remember, always calculate the sign, put it on the line. So my answer has to be negative. Now, how did I get negative 9? Well, I knew that there were more negatives than positives. That's why my answer was negative. And when you have a negative and a positive, you have to find the difference between the two. It's a tug of war. So difference means subtract. So I took 12, I subtracted 3, and got 9, which means with my decimal problem, I'm going to take 12.5, subtract 3.2, line up my decimals. 5 minus 2 is 3, 12 minus 3 is 9. So my exact answer is negative 9.3. Okay, very close to my estimate, so I feel good about that. Now, number 2, 17.6 plus negative 4.8. Again, I'm going to estimate. Now 17.6, very close to 18. Negative 4.8, very close to negative 5. So now if I'm adding an 18 and a negative 5, my answer's obviously going to be positive. Now how do I find the answer? Well, I have to look for the difference between 18 and negative 5, because if it's a tug of war between these two, and the negatives have 5 and the positive have 18, positive are going to win, but by how much? Well, I find the difference between the two numbers. So I take the big number, subtract the small number, I get 13. So my estimate is a positive 13. But what I see is I take the big number and I subtract the small number. So I take 17.6 and I subtract 4.8. And when I do that, 16 minus 8 is 8. 6 minus 4 is 2. And I get 12.8. Very close to my 13. Now I can erase the plus, because in general we don't put the plus down, but I wanted to put the plus down so I know that I thought about the sign. Okay, now number 3, I'm going to let you do number 3 on your own. But if we're adding a negative plus a negative, there's only one team. Okay, the negatives are definitely going to win. We just have to add these two together and keep it as a negative. Okay, now let's look at number 4. We have some fractions. Negative 6 3/8 plus 10 1/2. So the first thing I do is figure out the sign and put it on the line. So this is roughly negative 6 plus 10. Who's going to win the tug of war? The positives are. How much do I think they're going to win by? About 4. How did I come up with 4? Well, I came up with 4 because I did 10 minus 6. The difference between 10 and 6 is 4, which means I'm going to write 10 1/2 minus 6 3/8. Okay? Now, to do this, I have to get a common denominator. Well, I know 1/2 is 4/8, and if I do 4/8 minus 3/8, I get 1/8. 10 minus 6 is 4, so I know my answer is 4 1/8, very close to my estimate of 4. Now, I'm going to skip 5, let you do 5 on your own, and I'm going to do number 6, because number 6 is a little tricky. Now, I have negative 4 and 5/9 plus 2 and 5/6. First thing I do is figure out the sign and put it on the line. I'm going to estimate negative 5 plus 3. My answer is definitely a negative, and I think it's negative 2, because the difference between a 5 and a 3 is 2, so I do 5 minus 3 is 2, because the negatives would win by 2. So that means I start with 4 and 5/9, and I subtract 2 and 5/6. Okay? Now, I need a common denominator. So a common denominator between 9 and 6 would be 18. 9 times 2 is 18, so I do 5 times 2 is 10. 6 times 3 is 18, so I do 5 times 3 is 15. But now I have a problem, because I can't do 10 minus 15. So, when you have a mixed number, when we're subtracting, we're always putting the bigger number on top. The 4 is bigger. So 4 and 5/9 is bigger than 2 and 5/6. But it turns out 10/18 is not bigger than 15/18. Now, think about this. If I was doing 23 minus 7, and I went to subtract 7 from 3, I'd say, uh-oh, can't do it. I have to borrow. So we're used to borrowing in regular subtraction problems. So now I'm going to borrow from the 4. Well, that makes this number 1 and 10/18. I'm going to turn this into an improper fraction, and it becomes 28/18 minus 15/18,
School will be finished,
and that's 13/18. 3 minus 2 is 1.
Down to the cafeteria.
So it's negative 1
Thank you.
and 13/18, which is very close to negative 2. Okay? Now, we'll look at number 7. Now, when you have a bunch of decimals, 3 numbers, you always add the 2 positives together first and then subtract the negative. In the case of number 8, we're going to add the 2 negatives together. Why don't we do number 8 together? So number 8, negative 7.25 plus 6.3 plus negative 2.5. I'm going to add my 2 negatives together first. I get negative 9.75 plus 6.3. When I add a negative and a positive, I say, who's going to win the war? Okay? So this is basically negative 10 plus 6. Who's going to win the war? The negatives. By how much? 4. How do I get 4? Because I did 10 minus 6. Which means I'm going to do 9.75 minus 6.3. And I get 3.45 negative, which is close to negative 4. So I feel good about that. Okay, so the rest I'm going to let you finish on your own.